In the name of the Lord. Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. The youth exodus is one of the biggest crises currently faced by the church. Younger generations are abandoning both church and faith. 70% of church-going teens stop going to church upon starting college, per the 2017 research conducted by Lifeway. Children born between 1999 and 2015 are more than twice as likely to be atheists than current adults, according to a 2018 Barna research finding. That many young adults cite skepticism as their cause for leaving Christianity. Their doubts should come as no surprise. Secular worldviews are spread like airborne viruses, targeting children from their classrooms, from the media, and from the mouths of their peers. These lies arrive not only as statements, but also as entire ideologies that reject biblical truth and advance the lies of the enemies. Christian parents are commissioned by God to bring children up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Ephesians 6 and 4. But today, Sunday school songs and stories are not enough to build a firm foundation of faith when children have questions about moral relativity, Marxism, socialism, and the possibility of a multiverse. Hillary Morgan Ferrer, founder of Mama Bear Apologetics, has a burden for providing accessible apologetics resources for busy moms. She has a master's in biology and her specialties are scientific apologetics, dealing with doubt and identifying causes and solutions for youth leaving the church. Here to talk about her new book, Mama Bear Apologetics, Empowering Your Kids to Challenge Cultural Lies, is Hillary Ferrer. Hillary, welcome to the program. Hopefully I'm saying your last name correctly.
It's actually Ferrer.
Ferrer. Okay, Hillary Ferrer. Well, Jason, I think you said Ferrer was right. You had it wrong also. Well, between the two of us, we both got it wrong. But Hillary Ferrer.
Yes.
Okay. Welcome to the program. Glad to have you here. I think this is such an important issue. We have Christian apologetics. We have Jewish apologetics. But we don't have apologetics for kids. You wind up going to seminary and taking courses in hermeneutics, homiletics, apologetics. I actually studied under a PhD in Jewish apologetics. So I have volumes of answering Jewish objections to Jesus, authored by Dr. Michael Brown, who is a Jewish apologist. And he debates globally rabbis all over the world, world-famous Orthodox rabbis, arguing Jewish apologetics, that the Bible, from the beginning, from Genesis 1, establishes the messiahship of Jesus and that God would have one who would ultimately be our final sacrifice. And so when we take a look at the Hebrew, the Aleph and the Tav, the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega, the Jewish mind has a different way of processing because we add words to it. We say the beginning and the end of what? The first and the last of what? Because if you're going to have a first, and you're a scientist, so you know about ordinal as opposed to cardinal. Well, when you have something ordinal, okay, if you have a first, a second, a third, a first and a last, there has to be something in the middle. You can't have a first and last of just two. It has to be there has to be a bigger, what would you call that, sampling?
Sample size.
Yeah, sample size has to be bigger than two. So if he's the first and the last, if he's the beginning and the end, well, who's second, who's third, how many are there? That becomes the whole narrative from a scientific approach when we look at words like Alpha and Omega, Aleph and Tav, beginning and end, first and last. We have to ask the question of what? And there's actually an answer. And the answer is of the sacrifice for sin. He brought the first sacrifice for the sin of Adam and Eve, and the last sacrifice, Jesus, for man. He began the sacrificial system in the Garden of Eden, and he ended the sacrifice for sin on the cross. So we know the answer to the of what, we just forget to ask the question, the beginning and the end of what, because God has no beginning and he has no end. And now this is the depth of apologetics. This is where we really get to really say, wow, these are questions our kids might be asking us, and we could not have this conversation with our children, could we?
No.
All right, this seems so large, but I can tell you, these are the questions the kids ask.
Yes.
These are the things they're taught in school when they get their first place, second place, and third place, and they go, wait a second, Mommy, Daddy, in the Bible there's only a first and a last. Okay, where's all the rest of them? Okay, and if God is the first and the last, how many other gods were there between him in the beginning and him in the end? How many? All right, and do we serve those gods too? Or, well, if we only serve one God, then why is it a beginning and an end? And I don't understand that. That doesn't work in a unit, a singular unit. That becomes a plural unit. So it becomes very complicated, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And what we've done is we've done to our children in the area of apologetics the same thing we've done to our children in the area of education. And we've dumbed it down. And we've stopped rising to provoke them to enter into and to ask these really deep cerebral questions about words. The Bible is a book of words, and words are to be discussed. So the very first thing I want to do, I want to thank you and the other Mama Bears. All right? Because I didn't realize until I went to your website, which was Mama Bear Apologetics.com, that you actually had the Mama Bears, that you actually had this team of Mama Bears. It wasn't just you, it was this whole group. And so thank you. Thank you for rising up to this and taking on the tough questions. And the tough question I talked to you about offline, which I'll talk to you about online, is you answer the question, well, what do Jews believe? Okay, and you go through a long list of what Jews believe, and I'm Jewish, and well, I don't believe that, and I don't believe that, and I don't believe that. So we're going to have further dialogue because there's a whole segment of Jewish believers, and there's a whole set of instructions biblically that the gospel was to go to the Jew first. Well, if it's to go to the Jew first, then we have to assume that they're going to be receptive and that God is going to raise up that all of Israel will be saved. Well, if nobody preaches to them, if nobody teaches them, then how will they ever know? It becomes a very big question. It becomes the great omission instead of the great commission. All right, what do Muslims believe? Well, Shiites believe this, and Sunnis believe this, and the Houthis believe this, and all of a sudden you begin to realize that there is really, well, what do Christians believe? Well, some believe in miracles and some don't. Some believe in prophecy and some don't. And all of a sudden this becomes a very complicated, and so you've taken it on. This is the throwdown in this new book. So you're a scientist. You have the analytical brain that was nurtured and developed and wasn't really harnessed, because you can't really harness, you can't really bridle that analytical brain. You've got to let it, you got to give it its reins, you got to let it run.
Yeah,
So,
much to my chagrin, sometimes I'd like it to just calm down sometimes, but it wants to just keep on going.
so what was it like growing up in your household with your inquisitive mind?
Well, every teacher I've ever had has always commented to my parents that I ask a lot of questions. And even talking to my father much later on in my life, he said that whenever I would ask a question, you could always tell that I thought about A, B, C, D, E, and then all of a sudden I got to F and I wasn't sure. and I would just blurt out this question that you could see had this entire process that went before it. And so I think he knew that I was just different than most kids at that point. And he always encouraged that part of me. He didn't make me feel like, oh, stop asking questions. He loved answering questions. He liked discovering answers with me. And I think, I really attribute the way that he nurtured that in me as to be why I have stayed steadfast in the faith, because I was never afraid of asking questions about the Bible or about Christianity or about how do these things come together. And we still talk multiple times a week, just, when I'm going on walks, to talk about theological issues that we're just, discussing the nuances.
When you would have these conversations with him, did you find him to be kind of the role model for you to say, what I want to capture is the openness in which my dad received me and encouraged me to explore, even if he knew I was going to go down a dead end?
I think it is. I think one of the things that I love about my dad, I'm sorry, let me have a sip of water. I got a little frog in my throat. Is that he taught me that you don't have to have all the answers. It's all you have to know is where to find the answers. And so knowing how to search for answers, I think, is a skill that I always try to pass on to my students when I was a teacher. And that openness to look at things from two separate perspectives. So instead of just saying, this is my belief, and then go through a confirmation bias of I only look at everything that affirms that belief, well, let's look at things that don't affirm that belief and see how do they fit in. Like, why do we reject this idea as opposed to accepting this other idea? And I think that that openness and not fearing talking about things that we disagree with, and not talking about things that might, to some people, disprove what we claim to believe. Just basically having no fear that the Word of God is strong enough for the answers of a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, or 30-year-old, or 40-year-old, or whatever age you are. The Bible can stand firm, but you just have to keep digging.
Statistically, and we quoted from Barna, we quoted from Lifeway, there's new research that says that 80% of the body of Christ is biblically illiterate. 80%. And in that 80%, that is the moms and the dads. If the moms and dads are biblically illiterate, then in most cases they're more conversational about doctrine than they are about the Bible. So I can segment 50% know more about catechism and doctrine than about the Word of God. Another 25% know more about codes of conduct and rules of discipline and order than they know about the Bible. This is symptomatic of today's environment. So if the parents don't know the answers and the kids come to them, they tend to pass them off to a youth pastor or to someone else, and they still don't find out the answer, but the kid does. Is that part of what you're seeing as the problem that's existing today, is that parents feel ill-equipped to answer the questions or even open the dialogue?
I think more than them just saying right off the bat, I don't know the answer to this question, is I think we live in such a time that is so incredibly busy that having to get all the different kids to all their activities and make sure that they get to work and finish all their work, and two-income households, everybody is so busy that the time to take to just stop and look for answers, no one has the time. It's one of those things you have to make time to do. And so when you have parents that are passing it on to the youth pastor, well, a lot of times the youth pastor is just someone who has either just started seminary or just works really well with youth, and they haven't discussed any. They think all you need to do is preach Jesus more. Not that I don't think we need to preach Jesus, but I was really grateful to grow up in a youth group where during the summertime we went through our statement of faith for the church, line by line, to say what is it that we are believing. But I'm finding that most churches are kind of holding tanks with pizza when it comes to the youth group. You try to provide fun and friendship and throw a little Jesus in there and hope that it sticks. But when these kids are going out into the world and they have not gotten a good question, they may not leave the faith immediately, but they're kind of keeping a track of all these questions that have not been answered. And what I find happens a lot is they either, number one, have some sort of trauma, emotional trauma. That could be a bad breakup. It could be rejection in some way, but some sort of trauma that occurs. Or number two, they discover a sin that they don't want to give up. And at that point, they don't want Christianity to be true. So they reach into their back pocket and they'll pull out that list of questions that people were never able to answer for them. And they say, this is why I'm leaving the faith. And if you couldn't answer it now, I'm betting you can't answer it. Or if you couldn't answer it then, I'm betting you can't answer it now. But at that point, they really don't really want to hear the answers. And so it's almost too late.
I talked to a lot of experts in the field of youth ministry and reaching the young, regathering the millennials back into the fold. There's questions about relevance, but the number one issue that I hear about is hypocrisy. That I don't see my parents read the Bible. I don't see my parents pray. I've never heard my parents pray. I've never seen them open a Bible. I don't know where the Bible in our house is. I've never seen a prayer book or a Christian book. My mom loves Nicholas Sparks, and my dad is he's a big fan of John Grisham, and so those when we go on vacation, those are the books they take. But I don't think I've ever seen a book on how to raise children God's way or any of those things. So, but I'm hearing them say they want me to go to church and they want me to learn these things, but they don't surround me with it. So it's kind of hypocritical. It's I don't want to be a part of that generation, my generation that grew up in the 50s, that heard don't do as I do, do as I say. Now here we are running full circle almost 70 years later, saying don't do as I do as I say, and it didn't work in the 50s, and it's not going to work today.
Yeah, I think one of the things that people have leaned too heavily on is that there was a strong cultural backing for Christianity for so long that if you didn't have it reinforced in your home, you at least had it reinforced in culture. And not only do we not have this cultural reinforcement anymore, we actually have the opposite. We have culture actively trying to tear it down and trying to make the Christian sound like the bigot and the hypocrite and the judgmental and all these just and the hater. Oh, there's so much hate there. I can't stand all the hate. We have culture actively tearing it down. So once kids are going through and they didn't actually see their parents maybe making this a priority, they don't make it a priority. And once they get out, they have no reason to try to come back and do it with their kids because it's not even nostalgic anymore. In previous times, people might have come back to the church just for nostalgia's sake. It's not even nostalgic anymore. It's almost like you become a social pariah, and it's the kind of thing you want to escape from. And that's why we're seeing the rate of people who identify as none, meaning my religion is no preference or none. I think according to Steve Cable over from Probe Ministries, estimates it's going to be 50% of the population by 2030.
Well, we have a responsibility to change that, don't we?
Yes, we do.
And to put tools into the hands of parents early on. But even, I'm expecting my first grandchild. So this is a book that I'm going to make sure that I have the answers to, because I want her to have these conversations. She's going to have these conversations with me because of what I do. Because I'm out 4 days a week in churches speaking, and I'm on television every day for 3 hours live, preaching the gospel message and talking about the tools and resources that are available. So today, there is no excuse. 50 years ago, there might not have been an apologetics book for parents, or you had to have somebody that was professionally trained to take you down this. But there's a a resource, and this being one of them, that I never really ever thought, never crossed my mind that, parents need a book on apologetics so they can just talk to their kids. Mm-hmm. Maybe this becomes the talking point of tonight's dinner conversation. You mean you set one night a week aside to have a night where the family sits down and has a meal and has a conversation about one of these topics. And yeah, that's kind of probably a little bit hard to fathom to get started, but if you do it and they engage and there's no right and there's no wrong, and you get to hear what it is that your children are hearing and what they're being exposed to, you would then be able to have your own set of index cards with questions your kids are asking that you're going to be putting in this book that's going to make it the expanded version of Mama Bear Apologetics.
Yep.
How do you approach this? First of all, the message is there's a void. Nobody wants to hear that they're not doing their job. So first of all, there's a negative deliverance. Okay, there's a hole, moms and dads, you're not doing your job. So we're going to help you do your job. Okay, well, I don't. First of all, I have to agree with you that it's my job. Is it really my job? Well, according to the Bible it is, but then I have to decide on whether or not the Bible is the authority. Is that the starting point? Where do we start in this process? Or is this something that is self-starting? Is it already there? We just don't pay attention to it. If we paid attention to it, we might find that the questions are already being asked.
I think the questions are definitely already being asked. It just depends on who they're asking the questions to. I would like to think that this book isn't all about telling parents that they're not doing their job. That was definitely, if that came across, we don't want that to come across. It is encouraging, and it's trying to exhort parents to incorporate this aspect into their parenting and just kind of show how the spiritual nurturing is just as important as all the physical nurturing. And one of the things about this book that I really like is that I think that it's giving words to stuff that parents have already noticed. A lot of apologetics books are having to memorize more facts and having it's all new information. And even though this information is going to be somewhat new in the explanation, that it itself is something that I've had so many moms comment to me that, like, I've seen this going on and I haven't known what it was called, and I haven't known what to do about it. And in that sense, they've felt kind of beat down, like, I can't do this beforehand, before they have the words. And now that they finally have the words, it doesn't feel like another task that they have to add on to everything. It's something that they've been dying to do, but now they have the ability to talk about it. As far as where do we start, I think you were kind of going into the inerrancy of Scripture. I think that's something that needs to be addressed with kids. We don't go through the whole argument for inerrancy in this book right here, but I do think that is an important one that we do need to address with kids, because that's one of the number one things that culture is attacking, saying that, well, we kind of go into it in the terms of like the postmodernism chapter of, oh, that's your truth, this is my truth. That phrase right there is automatically saying that the Bible is not itself objectively true, because there is no objective truth. And we see this further discussed in the progressive Christianity chapter, where we see whole churches that are saying, well, the people that wrote the Bible were just giving their best explanation from where they were at the time, and we're progressing from there. We're learning more better what they meant, and we're saying, what did God really mean to a new generation in our time? And that right there goes against the idea of inerrancy as well. And so I think there's a lot of topics in here that we'll discuss how that is not that's not a position that we take, but defending inerrancy, I think, is extremely important, and you're right, that is a good place to start.
I think so too. I think that being a believer, Jesus didn't walk around condemning everybody for everything.
Yeah.
He asked questions, just like God asked questions. I mean, did God not know the answer when he asked a question? I mean, that would be a kind of question. Why did God ask a question if he knew the answer? Okay.
Yeah.
Mom, why did you ask the question, okay, are these your dirty socks? Okay, okay, you know that they're my dirty socks. Well, that's a great opportunity to say, God does that too.
Yeah.
God picks up your dirty socks and says, are these your dirty socks? He wants you to know that he knows that you know that he knows that these are your dirty socks. And so there's ways to incorporate this that are fun, that are easily integrated into everyday conversations. And I found the narrative to be easy to incorporate into conversations and conversation starters and opportunities for discussion about, well, if there's no evolution, then how come before 19 something we didn't have the car? Okay, how did that come about? Okay, how do we get smart enough to create a car when for 4,500 years before that we weren't smart enough to invent a car? A pretty good question. Okay, a pretty timely question, but there are answers out there. We're talking with Hillary, and say the last name again for me again.
Ferrer.
Ferrer. It's Ferrer, author of Mama Bear Apologetics, Empowering Your Kids to Challenge Cultural Lies. Your children are being fed a steady digest of new age, new way, socialist, Marxist, independent, almost a revisiting of Copernicus, but taking it from the earth being the center of the universe to you being the center of the universe. It's a kind of a new old Copernican kind of view, and all of a sudden it boils down to the individual, where each one of us is just like Satan, all vying to become little gods. And we tell our kids, you can be anything you want to be. You can do anything you set your mind to. Well, I'm 5'10", so I'm not going to be an NBA star. And so my parents didn't tell me that I could grow up to be anything I wanted to be. They said you can set your heart and your mind to do a lot of things, but you're going to have to find out what you're best at, right, in order to excel at that. And so there's an understanding that God gifts, and the Bible even tells us that not everybody's a prophet, not everybody's a teacher, and so we understand that narrative that says that you can be anything you want to be, well, God says that not everybody can be this and not everybody can be that. And so there's a whole different set of truths than what the narrative that's being fed to your children right now, and you have to decide what you're going to do about it. Are you going to take action? Are you going to be the active parent that says, you know what, I want my child to know the truth because the Bible says you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free? And that's exactly what Mama Bear Apologetics is about, is answers. Your kids have questions, right? And you, my friends, feel like you're falling short on finding the answers or knowing the answers, but you don't have to feel that anymore because you have a great resource like this. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to dig into some specific ways that moms can protect their children from a lot of the things they're going to hear in school, how you can answer questions or create an environment where questions can actually be asked, and there can be a free-form discussion where you can reveal the truth to your children without making it doctrine, dogma, and something that becomes rigid and inflexible. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Not everything that makes the headlines has biblical importance, but many events that happen around the world do, and you never hear about them. Igniting a Nation is pleased to teach Revealing Prophecy every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at the Marriott 280 in Birmingham. We will cover worldwide events and insider information that will connect the dots of what's happening around the world with biblical prophecy. If you happen to miss a class, we'll televise each week's class at 10 o'clock Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our social media outlets. Copies of the teachings will also be available to purchase on our website at www.ignitinganation.com. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of two Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan, in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Hillary Ferrer. I should do it phonetically. Ferrer.
Think of like a rare fur and then switch it.
There you go. Ferrer. There you go. I just fixed it on my notes. So Hillary Ferrer. Hillary, you talk about the roar method. What is that?
So the roar method is, we have a whole chapter on the discerning mama bear, and a lot of times people have really differing versions of what they think discernment is. Some people think it means you just point out everything wrong with something, and I think that's kind of a really bad method of the discernment, because that makes you a very negative person, I think. So the roar method is meant to really analyze ideas with truth and grace. So the roar stands for, number 1, recognize the message. If you and your kids are watching a movie or they have a favorite song, let's go through and figure out, what is the message? What is it saying? What are they valuing? What things are they trying to make you crave? What things are they trying to make you distance yourself from? And you can really grapple with, what is the message coming out? So just being able to accurately identify the message is the first step of discernment. And O is, we kind of had to squeeze this to one, is offer discernment, in the sense that what we're doing is we're acknowledging the good and acknowledging the bad, accepting the good and rejecting the bad. Instead of just going in there and saying, I don't like this, and this, we're saying, okay, first, what were the motivations behind this? What were the intentions? What problem are they trying to solve? Because I like to quote Walter Martin a lot from Kingdom of the Cults, where he says, the cults are the church's unpaid bills. A lot of times if you see something with a negative message, there is something that they are reacting against. And so if you want to be actively having a critique of your own beliefs, you want to see what they're reacting against. And a lot of times you can learn from that. However, that's where we recognize the good and we accept the good, but then we need to acknowledge the lies that are coming in and reject the lies. And this is a lot of times, again, like what you see happen in cults, is they see something that's going wrong, but then their solution for it is just a really bad solution. We've had, just heresy throughout the centuries of people grappling with certain issues, and then they solve it with this heretical statement about Jesus and say, okay, let's not go down that road. Let's reject the bad here, but what's a healthier approach? So the A is argue for a healthier approach. It's taking those intentions, it's taking those motivations, it's taking the things that maybe were a legitimate critique and saying, how is that better addressed from a biblical worldview? And then finally, the final R is reinforce through discussion, discipleship, and prayer. So we have recognize the message, offer discernment, argue for a healthier approach, and then reinforce through discussion, discipleship, and prayer. And I'd like to mention that the book, we have a woman who has been on working with moms in prayer for the almost last 20 years, who went through each chapter and charted it out and really showed moms how is it a theologically rich way to pray this over your children, because our battle is not just against ideas. Our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers and authorities. And so we're saying, how can we fight this battle with our minds, but also how can we fight this battle on our knees?
Hillary, we know that prophecy tells us that in the last days there's going to be, and it lists quite a few of the situations and conditions of mankind, and especially here in the West, that we're seeing, that they're going to become selfish, not respect their parents. There's lovers of self, just a whole long list. It doesn't mean we have to accept that every single person is going to be that, and that we cannot teach our children and raise families to stand on the Word of God. But do you find that parents are surrendered to the fact that their kids spend 40 hours a week in a school setting, 8 hours a day? They spend 40 hours of sleep, so that's 16 hours, 8 hours a day, and then they have whatever other activities that they have. Parents have a pretty short, they have the shortest amount of time of influence. It's shifted tremendously. The family unit, the more activities, they're going here, they're going there, they're very distracted. Are you finding that there is a kind of a fever that's growing? People are they're hearing this stuff. They don't know what to do about it, but it bothers them, and they want to do something about it, but they're not convinced that they can do anything about it. That it's just going to be that way, and that they're going to have to teach their kids how to deal with it, how to have tough skin, or how not to speak out, because that's when you get beat up. If you're the one that says something that's contrary to the group mentality, how do you deal with all of that? How do you make that decision that, as for me and my house, the Joshua decision, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord? Is it?
Well, I would say that, like, one of the first things that parents really need to do is make it clear to their kid that we are living countercultural. I really think we're getting closer. If we're not already there, we are getting closer and closer to being a post-Christian nation. And I think we can't treat our kids the way we were treated, because we still had somewhat of a Christian culture back even when I was growing up. We need to be very, very clear. We're living in a post-Christian nation, and we are going to live countercultural. That means that people will not understand why you believe what you believe. They are going to actively try to make you feel bad for what you believe, and that's where the linguistic theft chapter comes in. Is one of the greatest ways to combat what we have going on is looking at the words that have been commandeered, words like tolerance, and looking at the actual definition. The actual definition of tolerance says that you basically have to have disagreement or dislike, but that you live with respect despite those things. And so every time you see someone and they're hearing a protester screaming, "Be more tolerant," what they're usually asking is for everybody to agree with them. And so everybody has an equal right to be right. So just asking your kid, let's look at the definition of tolerance. What are they asking? Are they asking for you to live with respect despite your disagreements, or are they asking you to affirm whatever stance that they're taking? And so helping kids to understand how these words are being changed, I think, is uber important, because it will be very confusing, because otherwise what happens is culture is taking words like love or tolerance or violence even, changing the definition and saying, you call yourself a Christian, your God says you're supposed to love. Here's our definition of love. Go do that. And the kid starts going, well, I know I'm supposed to love. The Bible does say love. Well, okay, I guess that's how I'm supposed to love. So it's being active to make sure that when the words are changed, that your kids can tell the difference between them. And just, I think now would be a good time to study the book of Daniel with your kids. This is how you live in exile, because we are essentially, as Christians, we are exiles in our own country. And in exile, if you look at the way Daniel and his friends acted, they learned the stuff that they were learning in school. They were taken to the special schools to learn pagan literature, pagan customs, pagan ways, and they did it so well that they rose in ranks of authority. However, they did not change who they were. So maybe saying, what are some habits that we can build, that even if you're having to learn certain things outside of this home, what are some habits that are going to maintain our identity as a family, as Christians, despite everything that's going on? And lastly, I've been kind of thinking about this the whole time that you and I've been talking, is I had an old Bible study leader who said something that I think is kind of very true. It was something along the lines of 10% of the population thinks, 10% think they think, and the other 80% would rather die than think. And it's like really deciding to be that 10%. We are going to think through these issues. We are going to live intentionally, because thinking that the Christianity is just going to kind of rub off on them in an unintentional way. I mean, even just going to church, it's going to rub off in church. It's going to rub off even with just, a prayer every night. That's not going to work. With the number of hours that you're talking about, that they're away in culture, absolutely being steeped in culture, we need to find ways that we are intentionally reinforcing who we are and not expecting to fit in with everybody else.
So where do we draw lines? Where do we become the parents that say, we know that we have to be in the world but not of the world? We'll probably say that a million times in the course of all of our conversations with our kids when we walk through a toy store, or a new game comes out, or a new game box or Game Boy or game Xbox or whatever the latest, greatest is. And the top sellers are all violent, the top sellers are all graphic, the top sellers are bloody, they're wretched, they're horrid. And you know that their best friend has one, and they spend a lot of time with their best friend. And so you know that you can't be a policeman, you cannot create a culture of captives. So how do you equip your kids to process, to make good decisions, to empower them, to impart to them the ability to make choices to what they will participate in, what they won't participate in? Is it problematic for you to have games in your home? Is it problematic for you to have the movies that are out there in your home and have them watch? Is it just within our four walls that you can't do these things, and so your kids run to go visit their friends because they can do things there. That's the reality of life. That was the reality of life in the 50s. That was the reality of life in the 60s. It was the reality of life in the 70s. It's what kids do. They find where they can go to get away with whatever it is they can't get away with at home. So integrity has to be defined very early on.
I guess I'm trying to think of the way that I was raised. So since I don't have my own children, I don't feel like I'm the most qualified to say how other parents should do things. I do think it depends on the child. This is something that I don't know. This is one of those questions that every parent's going to have to answer before God. So I guess my advice is to say, if you're going to stand before God and say, what did you allow in your home? Think about that purposefully. Don't think about what everybody else has. And when I was a kid, there were certain things I was not allowed to watch, and it didn't matter where I was. They said you were not allowed to watch this at other people's house, and my parents even made sure that my friends knew, or they either made sure I was hanging out with friends who had the same values as they did, or or I was with parents who said, well, we'll back you up on whatever your rules are. You'll see this happen a lot of times with kids, that parents have to communicate about food allergies. We can't have any of this food around this child. So yeah, I would say that is one of those things that every parent's going to have to answer to God for. And so you need to ask the Lord, where are our boundaries, and what is the wisdom? And in fact, one of the questions that I like people to do is, don't just go to what is right and wrong, because that puts everything into this black and white category. And in our section on chew and spit, we learned that there is no black and white categories. It's that you're going to find truth and error in almost everything. And so you need to be able to learn how to chew and spit, to acknowledge and accept the good, swallow the good, and spit out the bad. So I guess that would be my advice: teaching your kids to chew and spit, having friends that have the same convictions, communicating with other parents what the rules are in your house, and asking for them to abide, to help your kids abide by those rules outside the house. And then beyond that, just teaching your kids why you don't watch certain movies, why you don't play certain video games. And I think one of the ways that you can do that is especially just talking through messages with your kids and helping them understand what the messages actually are. And is this something you want to be programming your mind with? So.
It's interesting that today we have more active grandparenting than probably since World War II. This is probably the most active season of grandparenting that we've ever seen.
I agree.
I wasn't a believer when my daughter was born. I didn't come to faith until several years afterwards. She's expecting, within the next couple of weeks, my first grandchild. And thinking about the kind of conversations and the kind of dialogues that grandparents can have with their grandchildren, I think this would be an outstanding resource, especially if there was, in my case, there wasn't an opportunity to really have these kind of, I was learning. I was a brand new believer. I knew nothing. I knew about my Jewish identity, but I didn't know about my identity in Messiah. And that's something that takes years to perfect and understand. So if I came to faith when my daughter was 4, it was by the time she was 14 that I was really pretty conversant in my faith. Well, that's a little bit late to start imparting to a teenage child. But now I have the opportunity to start with my granddaughter from the very beginning. And I think that's a tremendous resource. So you don't have to be a mom to be a mama bear. You don't have to be a mom to be a papa bear either. And I think that it's important that this is a decision that parents make, that they want to open up a dialogue, and they've been searching for something that they can do together. There's a lot of devotionals out there, but this isn't a devotional. This is actually a Q&A. This is actually where the rubber meets the road with questions and good solid answers. Do you feel, and have you felt since you began testing these ideas and these concepts with various groups and having the feedback from the other moms that are a part of the Mama Bear pack, I guess you would call them, that the children that are being exposed to this are stronger because of it? Not necessarily stronger in their faith, not necessarily stronger in their answers, but they are actually stronger in their identity as to who they are.
I would say, first off, I'm going to go back to what you said a second ago about the grandparents. We are finding that grandparents are more influential in their grandchildren now, like you said, than any other generation. And secondly, this book has a demographic that I did not expect to go crazy for this book, and that is grandparents. And I'll tell you the reason why. Is culture is kind of like being a frog in a kettle, and the grandparents have we kind of go a little bit in a historical try to keep it historical of an idea that flowed into another idea, which flowed into another idea, kind of to see this whole shift from orthodoxy down to, at the very last chapter, progressive Christianity, which is what we've seen, and all the steps in between of how we got there. Grandparents, I'm finding more than anything, are the ones that have said, we have lived through this entire shift. We watched it go on, and we want to help teach our children and our grandchildren how to spot this too, because sometimes the ones that are now the moms, they've been the frog in the kettle, and the grandparents saying, you're in boiling water, and the frog's going, I don't know, it feels pretty good to me. So I just wanted to affirm that with grandparents. But, and then in terms of, I'm trying to remember what your second question was.
Well, were the kids, as a result of this, acting stronger? And unfortunately, we've run out of time, so this is going to have to be a yes or no answer.
Well, since it was only released a month ago, it's going to take a little more time to really find out.
But these concepts, you've had these concepts in play, and you've been promoting them through the other Mama Bears and their application of them.
I've had parents say that they are able to have conversations with their kids now in a way that they hadn't been before.
And that is the goal of this book, is to have conversations with your children and grandchildren that you might not have been able to have before. Now you'll feel equipped. The book is called Mama Bear Apologetics, Empowering Your Kids to Challenge Cultural Lies, written by author Ferrer. And you can get it at Amazon or any of the local bookstores. But once again, Mama Bear Apologetics. And visit their website, mamabearapologetics.com. There's lots of resources up there. There's ways to connect with them. There are blogs, podcasts, and answers to some questions that you didn't even know that you had a question about. You'll find an answer there. Hillary, thank you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, and God bless you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.